Hi, everybody. Welcome so much to this panel and workshop all about how to make virtual reality projects. I've got some amazing creators here to talk about their work, and I am going to give you an overall kind of view of the VR landscape. My name is Ingrid Klopp. I am one of the co-founders of Electric South, which is a production company and incubator for virtual reality and immersive work. We're based in Cape Town in South Africa, and we work with artists across Africa. We run labs and we do production and distribution, and we're very, very passionate about kind of building an ecosystem for this work on the continent. Darren, if you want to just do a quick introduction of yourself.
Hi, yeah, my name is Darren Emmerson. I run a production company here in London. I'm in the UK, called East City Films. We've been working in VR and now also in AR for about 6 years. And yeah, so that's what we do.
Great. Dylan?
Yes, everybody. My name is Dylan Valley, and I'm a documentary filmmaker. I'm based in Cape Town in South Africa, and I'm also a lecturer at the University of Cape Town. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Great, thank you. Yasmin?
All right, hi everybody. I'm Yasmin Elliot. I'm an immersive director and also co-founder of a company called Scatter. We're based in Brooklyn, New York. And yeah, my work is focused on volumetric filmmaking.
Awesome. Okay, so I am going to kick things off and just give you a little overview of the glorious world of VR. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Great, there we go. Okay, so this is just going to kind of give you a kind of a real overview, but it's a very high level overview. And as you will notice as I go through this, there are lots of things that I don't talk about. So I'm really hoping that these amazing directors and creators will kind of dive into a lot of the stuff in more detail. So first of all, I just want to talk a little bit about the different kinds of VR that we're going to be talking about today. You'll often hear about people talking about 360 versus room scale or true virtual reality, or 3DOF and 6DOF. And what they're talking about basically is the DOF is degrees of freedom. And it's really the difference between being able to just move your head around, which is the 3 degrees of freedom, where you can kind of look up and down like this, which is a 360 project, and 6 degrees of freedom, where you are actually able to move your head around, but you can also walk through space. So you can move forward and backwards from side to side, and you're kind of being tracked as you go. So obviously with 6 degrees of freedom, you do have more of a sense of true virtual reality, where you can actually move through a space and interact with that space. And there's a little bit of politics around this. I personally, I get a little bit like bristly when people kind of talk about 360, dismiss it as not VR, because I think all of it is really immersive and has its own qualities, and it can all be mushed together. And I think one of Darren's projects will kind of show you how that can work. So, you know, I think in terms of creativity and possibility, sort of embracing the full spectrum from 3DOF to 6DOF is the most exciting thing for me. But just to kind of give you a sense, because one of the things that you'll notice in this space is people throw around a lot of jargon, and you can kind of feel a bit excluded. So I think just kind of knowing what these things mean can be really, really helpful. And this is just a kind of another illustration of exactly that. So in 360 video, you know, you're able to look around, but you can't move from one tree to the other. You can't pick up things. You're kind of stuck with just those 3 degrees of movement. And then cameras. So if you are making 360 films or any kind of film with a 360 environment, you obviously have to capture that whole environment. And we've come a long way since I'm sure a lot of the folks on this panel can testify to that. You know, we used to have to do these incredibly complicated rigs with lots and lots of GoPros or other cameras, and then they had to be stitched together. And it could be quite complicated and time consuming. And things have got a lot easier. You've got prosumer gear like what's that one called? The Insta 360 camera. And this one actually has remote tracking. But there's also cheaper cameras like the Samsung 360 VR camera. There's a little theta. I don't have any of my gear with me because it's all in the office at the moment, but you know, there's still a whole spectrum of ways that you can capture reality if you want to make a 360 project. And it's a lot easier now. You don't have to spend days and days stitching the footage once you've captured it. A lot of it will self-stitch. And yeah, I personally find everything way easier these days, and it's really exciting to see how far it's come. And when we say these days, we mean literally in the last, I don't know, 5-7 years. The time frame is so short for a lot of the stuff, and you know, just to see how much better and cheaper things have become and easier just in that time is kind of extraordinary to think about. And then there's other ways of capturing reality. There's volumetric capture. This is actually, I thought this was an interesting example to show, because this is actually the Intel stage, which was the biggest capture stage, I think, in the world. It had over 100 8K cameras, but it's actually closed down, I think because of, you know, for financial reasons. So I think there's some really interesting things you'll find if you're reading about like the life cycle of VR up to now, how many companies have kind of come into the space and gone out of the space, how many technologies have sort of arrived, and then a year or two later, it seems like they've gone bust or something has changed. And I think one of the things that I've really learned, you know, in working in the VR space is you kind of have to hold your nerve and have a little bit of a long view and understand that some things will come and some things will go. But there's always amazing new technologies that are being developed. And as a creator, if you can kind of, you know, hold the line and just kind of use things as they come and not be too terrified if it looks like everything's kind of disappearing, I think that's the best way to work in this space, because it can be a little bit terrifying. There's been a lot of death of VRs and winters of VRs and all the rest of it in my time, and we're all still here. So you know, I think that this is as an exciting time to jump into the space as any other, but you just kind of have to keep your eyes open and not be too worried about all the things that come and go, because that does happen. And you know, just briefly, I'll also say money comes and goes too. The funders and the kind of finance in the space comes and goes remarkably quickly as well, but it does come back usually, just often in a different form. So one of the things when we're thinking about 6 degrees of freedom VR, one of the things that I think is really cool to think about are like the superpowers of VR. So if you're a traditional filmmaker, for example, to kind of think about what the superpowers of VR are that actually make VR different, feel different, do different things to what traditional film do. And it's not, you know, I come from film. I'm a huge believer in traditional film, but I just think, you know, there are different mediums and they have different qualities. And one of the things that is extraordinary about being in VR is the sense of presence. And actually, I think you get presence both in 3DOF and in 6DOF VR. The sense of kind of being there. You know, here you can see that people are just walking on a piece of wood on the floor, but they really feel like they're about to fall off a building. And, you know, I've done this piece and it's terrifying. So that sense of presence is really real. And, you know, often our brains actually remember things as real. So one of the things that as a creator, I think you really have to think about as well is care of the audience and how you actually look after them when they're in a VR experience that they are experiencing at the time as something that's actually physically happening to them. Another superpower is embodiment, where you can embody another person, another thing, and, you know, really kind of feel like you are in the scene and part of it. And again, this is like an extraordinary thing, especially when your whole body is actually tracked. So you can have setups where your hands are tracked, but also your legs can be tracked. So your whole body can be moving through the space and interacting with the space. So those are two of the, I mean, there's others, but I think embodiment and presence are two of the greatest superpowers of VR. And obviously embodiment, you're going to get more in 6DOF room scale VR experiences. Then just to talk very briefly about headsets, or what you might hear referred to as HMDs, which is head-mounted displays. Again, the jargon, I just thought I should put that in there just in case you hear HMD. So there's a whole bunch of different headsets. There's the old school, amazing, still great Google Cardboard that you can slip your phone into, super cheap, you can make one yourself. There's now the Quest. This is actually the Quest 1, but the Quest 2 is out and fairly affordable. I mean, it kind of depends on what you just consider affordable, but you know, they're pretty affordable, and you don't need a super high powered computer with a fancy graphics card to run it. All you need is the headset. It comes with the controllers, and you are ready to go with 6 Degrees of Freedom VR. You can do all sorts of amazing things. And like I say, you don't need a computer to run it. There are also augmented reality headsets. Now with AR, you can also do it on your phone. You know, if you do Pokemon Go or anything like that, and you're holding your phone or your tablet, that's AR. But you can do it with a head-mounted display. This is the HoloLens and the Magic Leap. Often people ask me whether like I'm, you know, more passionate about the future for VR or AR, or do I think that AR is going to be like the big, you know, consumer device, and VR is going to be more enterprise. And my answer to that is honestly, I think it's all going to collapse, and we are going to have eventually headsets that do both. I mean, already you can do that a little bit with VR headsets. And so I kind of think about VR and AR as being on a spectrum, I guess, in the same way that I think about 360 and room scale experiences. For me, it's all about like, what are you trying to achieve? What story are you trying to tell? Who's your audience? And I believe that the technology eventually is going to allow us to do many different things with one headset. So I'm a VR AR agnostic, I guess. I like all of it, but we do tend to work mostly in virtual reality with Electric South. And then I just wanted to quickly talk about, you know, other ways of viewing 360 content. If you don't have a headset, any kind of headset, you can also use your smartphone as a magic window by just going like this. You can use a browser and use the mouse to kind of drag through the 360 experience. And often you can actually switch into VR mode and then view it through a headset, like for example, the Google Cardboard. This is from Lucid Web, who actually did a site for us when we had a festival, a VR festival last year. And this was just a way of sort of making it all more accessible for our audience who were throughout Africa and often didn't have headsets. So we've made a bunch of different projects, mostly 360 projects thus far. And to be honest, a lot of that was actually just because me and my co-founder come from a film background, and the 360 workflow made a lot more sense to us. We were really used to it, and we understood how to build a team to make 360. Increasingly now we're making other kinds of projects. And there's actually a project coming out, premiering at Rotterdam, called the Subterranean Imprint Archive, which is a project built in Unity, which is a game engine that you can construct 3D worlds in. And we're really excited about that because we haven't had a chance to do much of that kind of work to date. And I think we're going to be doing a lot more in the future, which I'm really excited about. So just very quickly with the headsets, I showed you a picture of the Quest. The Quest, as you saw, is just standalone. The computer is in the headset, which does make it a bit heavy. It's not super comfortable to keep on your head for too long. But it does mean that you don't have to have, like I said, the high-powered gaming computer to drive it. And you don't have cables to trip over or that sort of pull you back to the computer, like you can see in this illustration. The good thing about the Quest is it's super easy to like use anywhere. It's fairly affordable, like we mentioned. The slightly less good thing is the comfort, because you've got this heavy computer. Well, it's not that heavy, but it's a little bit heavy on your face, so it can get a bit ouchy if you use it for too long. But also the tracking. So the way you're being tracked through space is actually from the headset. So it does mean that you can actually lose the tracking from the sensors in your hands. If you can see in that illustration there, if your hand goes too low. Whereas if you're using outside in tracking with cameras tracking you from outside, which would be like with the Rift or the Vive, for example, you get much better coverage. So that's why some people still really prefer to use connected headsets, even though they are, they're more expensive and they need more hardware. But there are good reasons for doing that. The cool thing about the Quest is that you can actually also connect it to a computer with a cable, which enables you to do experiences that might require a little bit more processing power. So that to me is a really good, I feel like that shows like in the future how maybe the hardware will be little bit more modular, which means you can use the same piece of hardware in different ways. And I think for Africa, that's really exciting, because it means that we can kind of use the hardware in the way that we need it to work for us in different situations. So I'm just gonna, very quickly before I wrap up, there's lots of things I haven't mentioned. There's so many different ways of capturing reality that I haven't talked about. Photogrammetry, you know, light field technology, so many things. So, you know, this is just the very bare bones of some things you can do. I also didn't talk about one incredibly important part of VR and telling stories, which is audio. You know, what you hear and how the sound actually builds the story and enables you to experience the story in different ways and leads you through the story. So I'm hoping some of my amazing panelists will talk a little bit about that. But I just wanted to just quickly leave you with some of the reasons why it's really important for me that we are doing VR and AR and all the R's, XR in Africa. You know, I really truly believe that we are going to move into a future of spatial computing and this metaverse that we are all being dragged into, whether we like it or not. And in this future, it is really important that Africa is part of that, and that the storytellers in Africa are part of the story. So it's this idea of, you know, if we are democratizing the imagination and design of our future, then we should be part of all of those conversations. And so whenever anyone tells me that, like, it's crazy to be, you know, talking about VR and AR in a continent where it's really hard to get access to the headsets, I totally take that on board. We have lots of access issues, absolutely, but I still think it's really important that we're part of that conversation. And you know, there's nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns, and we should be discovering those suns. So I'm from the hip on Twitter. If you have any questions after this, and Electric South is electricsouth.org on the interwebs. All right, I am going to stop screen sharing, and then if I can get my cursor back. Hang on, there we go. Okay, so that was a roller coaster, very quick spin through a few things about VR. And now we're going to deep dive a little bit into some projects, which I think will hopefully connect, you know, the kind of overview to some of the things that you might be interested in as artists and storytellers. Darren Emmerson, take it away.
Oh, good, thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen, make sure it's the right one. And there we go. Can you see my desktop?
Yep. I think
Great.
You just have to go into play mode.
Great. Cool. Okay. So, yes, as Ingrid said, my name is Darren Emmerson. I run a company in London called East City Films, and we've been running this company for about 16 years now, and it's changed quite a lot over that 16 years, from making music videos and filming live bands mainly, to now, since 2014, really doing VR and 360 video. Myself, you know, I wear lots of hats in the company, as people tend to do in small production companies. I'm a producer, I used to be a production manager, but I also am a documentarian, and I make my own VR documentaries. And I'm sort of known for these three pieces of work, really: Witness 360, Indefinite, and Common Ground. So I'm going to start really talking very briefly about Witness 360. I made it in 2015, so this feels like quite a long time ago now in terms of VR. And as Ingrid sort of pointed out, everything has changed quite dramatically in that time. But Witness 360 was a documentary piece about a lady called Jackie Putnam, who was a survivor on the 7/7 bombings, terrorist bombings in 2005 in London. And so we had just started working in 360 video, and I had seen some of the very early documentaries, things like Clouds Over Sidra and stuff like that. And I was just really intrigued about it, and I really wanted to kind of start doing it myself. So this piece of work was actually made for very little money, almost no money. You know, it wasn't commissioned by anybody. It was just something that I wanted to make, just to really sort of kind of explore the medium. So we sort of kind of went out and made this piece of work. And really it concerns the events of that day, but it's really more about the sort of metaphysical life of Jackie's sort of kind of memories of that day, and how they interweave with her sort of reality and her memories of this event, and how that trauma sort of kind of plays out. And so I thought to myself that that sounded like a really good idea for something that a medium that was already kind of doing that. So what you can see here on the screen is we've got 3 different videos playing, and what they are sort of, for want of a better word, special effects that we used in this piece of work. Because we were just starting out, we were actually taking, and we didn't have any money, we were taking the camera and we were using it in kind of really weird, different ways. We're doing in-camera effects, essentially. So on the left here, we have, we put the camera in this really dark room, we shone lights, and we literally physically span the camera. And we would do stuff like that, like experiments, and then we would stitch it, and then we'd put it in the headset just to see what it looked like. On the right there, we have, we put the camera in a tent. I did it in my office on a balcony. I put up a tent, and it was really dark. I filled it with smoke, and we started using torches, and just to see what that was going to look like. And in the middle is a very simple sort of After Effects kind of thing that we did around the tunnel. And again, we were just playing around, and some things worked and some things didn't, and it was really good to experiment. So once I'd done that, I kind of, Witness did really well. I went to IDFA Doc Lab and lots of different festivals around the world, which was really great. And that allowed me to apply for a VR commission at Sheffield Doc Fest. And that was in 2016. And that's for this piece, which is called Indefinite. And Indefinite premiered at Sheffield Doc Fest, and it was also then sort of bought by the New York Times, and they did some stuff around it. They put it on their app, and they wrote some articles around indefinite detention, which is the subject matter. So indefinite detention in the UK asylum system. And this video, which is going to play in the background, is really just a behind the scenes video of us making it in 2016. And the main difference between this and the first one is, well, okay, so now we've got a little bit of money. So we've got a bigger crew. I think the first one was just me and one other person running around. So this is, we've got a crew, and we were able to hire some locations. We could do some art direction. We managed to, this is the first time we did spatial sound, which is really when you record sound using special mics that anchor that sound within the sphere. So if somebody's on your left, they sound like they're on your left, and you might turn to face them. We also still did lots of in-camera effects, like this one, where we place a camera in a location, and we manipulate the location around the camera. And so we're still doing stuff like that. We're starting to experiment with movement. So at the beginning, it was like you couldn't move. No, everyone was like, you can't move the 360 camera, which was quite quickly debunked, because that's nonsense. You can, and it's just about experimentation and trying to work out what works for people once you've shot it and you've put it back into the headset. So we did lots of different things, and this piece of work was again was quite successful. You can see here we started to kind of play a little bit now with, I guess, magical realism and using the 360 environment, not just as a literal environment, but as an imaginative environment where we can kind of intertwine animation and different effects. So, so that was Indefinite. And then, so after that, I sort of really focused, and ECT Films focused on, it was a very busy period, I think, 2016, 2017. Lots of people wanted to do 360, and as Ingrid mentioned, a lot of people, certainly in terms of brands and different sort of kind of organizations, came into the market, and we ended up making a lot of stuff. So I would really concentrate directing for people like the BBC or the National Theatre, or producing independent pieces of work for other artists that wanted to get into that space. So that was a really kind of busy time, lots going on, and again, like things kind of pushing forward. And, I think, as Ingrid mentioned as well, like that also sort of kind of stopped as well after a while. There wasn't such a boom time, but I stayed in it. And by about 2018, I sort of was ready to make my own piece of work again, original piece of work. And that was called Common Ground, which was funded in the UK by Creative XR and the Arts Council England, and also a place called Story Futures Academy. So this piece of work concerns the Aylesbury estate, which is this council estate, we call them, but it's like public housing estate that is being knocked down, and it was the largest estate in Europe. And the piece really looks at how the community is being displaced, but it's also about why it was designed the way it was designed, what were the ideals around it. And so it's about design, community, and politics, really, and it kind of fuses all of those together. The estate itself has been sort of derided since it was actually finished. There's a picture there of the people who are opening it and drinking a beer as it's finished, and the headline is already top of the flops. So it never had a really good reputation. So what we wanted to do was to get under the, I guess, kind of get under the skin of all the headlines and actually meet people that were living on the estate. And this is a guy called Anthony Badu, who's an amazing person who was campaigning for the community there, and really inspiring guy, who we're still working with today in terms of activism around this project. And he's going to be working on my next project as well. This piece, again, like the other two, we're kind of, we're starting very small, we're getting kind of bigger. This piece does more stuff. So again, we've got 360 video, but this time it's stereoscopic 360 video, which for the jargon busters kind of means it's basically 3D. So things seem like they're in like a 3D film. Then we obviously got spatial sound again, which is so important in terms of creating an environment, as is just interesting sound design. And then we've got photogrammetry there. That's a picture actually of a point cloud. And essentially what we were doing with photogrammetry is a process of taking lots of photos, still photos on a normal camera of a space, and covering it, and then feeding that into a modeling computer. And from there, you build a 3D model of a space. And that allows you then to have 6 degrees of freedom, which Ingrid already explained, which means you can now start to walk around spaces and investigate them. We also added interaction. You can have 6 degrees of freedom and not interact specifically, but we wanted people to interact as well. And you can interact in common ground, both in scenes at 3 degrees of freedom and some 6 degrees of freedom. And we also added archive. We were playing with how to incorporate archive and traditional cinema and video into the VR environment. So here is a trailer for that piece of work, so you get a sense of it.
It was a really good place to bring up a family. That's why I chose to live in this area, and that's why I'd like to stay.
I don't think you'll ever find a stronger community.
My home means an awful lot to me. You know, I've brought a family up there. My late husband died there.
Whole community is going to be wiped out from here, and our voice never been heard.
London is becoming a city for wealthy people, especially inner city London.
We need to go to make way for empty flats for foreign investors.
Okay, so I mean, when I talk about this piece, I talk about sort of embodied documentary, and for me, that's a term that I'm sort of kind of trying to use with the documentaries I'm making, in terms of embodiment. You know, it's like what Ingrid was saying earlier about presence and feeling that you are in that space and being able to do stuff. And of course, there's different ways of creating embodiment. You know, so quite clearly with a VR headset, there's, you know, you've got your sight, you've got your hearing, but with volumetric space, you can move around, but then with interaction, you have object perceptions and object manipulation, which draws you into the story. What we don't do with this, we don't add sort of smells, you know, multi-sensory in that sense, although, you know, we are looking into that for the next projects, and also touch, although we have controllers, we don't have haptic feedback, which is another thing, another layer that we could use. And then, you know, physiological responses from environmental changes of things like, you know, when you show something, a piece like this, can you change the temperature? Can you use wind machines? Can you do all sorts of different things to make you really feel like you're there? And we have experimented with that with other stuff. so, you know, these free videos, you know, they just show the 6 degrees of freedom space, really, and interaction within it. For me as a director, I still want to, I've come from a film background as well, and I still want to be able to direct and tell a story. That's really important to me. You know, people say to me, oh, how do you direct in VR? You have to give away control completely. And I don't believe that's true. In fact, I'm pretty controlling when I'm making something. But what I'm trying to do is create an environment and a series of linked environments that tell a story in a way that has a linear path through it. You just don't know necessarily that there's a linear path that you're going through. You feel that you have freedom. I haven't done any branching narratives, for instance. So this picture is something I put together last night. I was thinking, oh, I put together all the pictures, lots of cool pictures. And so these are just different sets and different things that we've done. And the reason I put it together really was to show that on this page, there is a bit like Ingrid put up, you know, in the bottom left corner, we've got the jump camera, the Google jump camera. We've also got the Omni camera, which was made by GoPro. We've also got an Obsidian. We've got a LiDAR scanner there. We've got drones. We've got all sorts of different things going on. And they're all great fun. But the one thing that I think is important is to really not think about the technology necessarily too much, or get too hung up on about what you're going to use and how you're going to use it, but still focus primarily on story. And in particular, for me, it's like, you know, if I'm going to work in this medium, it's about identifying stories that are important to me. Why I want to make them and how I can make them in this medium, and having an authentic voice. I think, you know, for me, I like to make stories about the UK and recontextualizing politics in the UK from periods when I was growing up. That's the thing I'm like really into. And so that's important to me. And that's why I think, you know, some of the stuff that I'm making can cut through a little bit, because I'm not trying to make something for somebody else, something, you know. And really, like, VR is very good about, you know, it's very good connecting audiences to emotional states and finding an emotional heart of a subject, even if it's a political subject or something that, you know, everybody that came to see Common Ground, I think at the beginning, and it was at Tribeca, I think people had to find it to know that it was a good piece of work, because on the surface of it, it's a piece of work about social housing. And that doesn't necessarily, you know, make you think, wow, VR, but actually it's about that emotion that people connect to in the end. And just a few little tips, like when I'm making something, I think these days access is, you know, is always like the most important thing if you're going to make anything. But for me now, developing scripts and storyboards, it wasn't quite as important before. I was kind of experimenting and it was all kind of coming together fairly easy. And now I really have to kind of work much harder at developing kind of sequences and how they work. And last sort of tip really is, I like to work primarily with audio at first. So, you know, often this is a screenshot of a timeline, edit timeline from Indefinite. And what you'll see here in different color codes are all these different interviews that we've done with survivors of detention. And we'd cut them up into specific subjects. And we kind of, you know, I work very, very much in audio first to try and build a narrative, and then I start to sort of kind of imagine and layer the imagery on top. And that's kind of a way I like to work. And then this last one, I just like threw in at the very end, and it's something as a company we give to our clients, but it kind of gives you a bit of a 360 kind of timeline of how to make something. And I'm happy to send this to anybody, but it's, you know, it's from recce to scripting to the, you know, script lot and the shooting, the proxy stitching is where you stitch the image and then you go into edit and then you do all the finishing and stuff like that. So I just added that because I thought, oh, it might be interesting for people to look at. But yeah, that's it for me. And I'll stop sharing. If I could find my, oh yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much. That was great. And so I think so useful to see that part at the end. Dylan Valley, you are up next. Will you share your screen?
Yes. Hey, everybody. How's it going? So I'm very new to the world of VR and AR. And like Ingrid says, all the R's. My background is in documentary filmmaking. And the first time I actually worked in VR. Actually, the first time I saw VR was a program that Electric South put together a few years ago for the Encounters Festival in South Africa, and Darren's film was actually part of that. So Darren, your film was one of the first VR films I actually saw, Indefinite. And it was really, really inspired by that in terms of opening my mind up into how documentary can actually, or how this medium can be used for documentary storytelling. So I'm gonna share with you guys about a project that I made that came out of the Electric South lab. Oh, sorry, I just shared the wrong screen. Excuse me. Let me just stop that. So the project I made through the Electric South lab, which was called Azibuye, it's called Azibuye, the occupation. This is the film here. Okay, so the Azibuye is really a film about a housing occupation in Johannesburg, and I approached this story, the first time doing VR, I wasn't yet sure how it would work. I had a sense after being in the Electric South lab and getting to meet Ingrid and Yasmin, who was one of our lovely instructors, blowing our minds with all this great new information and knowledge. And basically, so with this film, it was really kind of an experiment, I would say, for myself in terms of how to use VR for a documentary that was something that I wanted to tell. The film is about two activists and artists, Ivan and Marcelo. And Ivan he used to be in Umkhonto weSizwe, which was the armed wing of the ANC, the liberation, one of the wings of the liberation movement in South Africa. Marcelo is quite a well-known actress in South Africa, and now very much an activist, like a cultural activist. And as a kind of artistic resistance, they occupied this abandoned mansion in an affluent neighborhood in Johannesburg. And they declared this a kind of site-specific art installation. And I'd known about the occupation before. I wasn't really going to make a film about it. But after doing the lab and having the opportunity to make a film, a 360 film, I realized this would be a great opportunity for that, because we were talking earlier about that idea of presence, and actually being present in this house was quite something. And I had visited it before because I know Marcelo and Ivan before working on this project. I'd known them already, and it's really something actually being able to visit this house. So it was completely gutted. It had been standing empty for about 20 years. And over time, people had come across the house and had removed bits and pieces of it. And so there were no windows, no door frames, and no piping, nothing was working. And so Marcelo and Ivan were kind of slowly like making this place more livable. But what they were really doing was actually asking questions about land in South Africa and redistribution of land. And so they were also talking about the systematic dispossession of land of Black South Africans and how that wasn't really addressed. In post-apartheid, when apartheid ended, most Black South Africans don't own any land. And yet there's a lot of urban land in cities that are just unused. So this house became a symbol of that. So you can see this would be a stretched out view of the 360 video. This is what you would see if you turn the global sphere into a rectangle, and you could see these are like different laws of dispossession, which are real laws that were passed during colonialism and also in apartheid to basically dispossess Black people of land. So they painted all the walls in the house, many of the walls in the house, with the artist statement and these various laws of dispossession. And the idea was also to invite people to come and visit the house and to have conversations about land in South Africa. And this was one of the earlier collaborators in terms of this occupation. we actually ended up leaving. I'll get a little bit into that. I'll get a little bit into that just now. And that was the camera we used, the Insta360, which was also really useful, very handy camera, and surprisingly, it is finicky, but surprisingly easy to use at the same time, which I actually really enjoyed being able to work with it. And so the idea is like to really place the audience inside this occupation, and so when you're in the headset, you can look around and see all these kind of details of what this house maybe used to be like, and now you get to see details of how they're fixing it up and what they are trying to turn the house into. And so the film got into Sundance, which we're really happy about, and since then it's really traveled quite well. And as a documentary filmmaker, found it very rewarding working in VR. Also, what I really liked about it is the sense of there's also a sense of play when you're working with something for the first time. And the great thing about VR also is that not many people are actually experts in it. There are a few. Some of those people are on this call, not myself. I'm not including myself there. But that's the great thing about being a filmmaker and working it, is that there is a sense of play and discovery. That last shot that we showed you, that was in that poster of Ivan fixing the roof, that was just something that Caitlin Robinson, who's the producer of the film, also shot it. We just decided it would be a fun idea to go into the roof and shoot from there. And that's actually one of the most affecting shots in the film, that people have a physical reaction to that one, because they actually feel like they're in the roof with Ivan as he's fixing a big hole in the roof. And some people jump when they see it. It wasn't our intention, but it was also something that came out of just kind of playing around with the camera. And also in that kind of a film shoot, it was really great because it doesn't have as much of a hierarchical feeling as a lot of film shoots do. So that's something that I really appreciated as somebody who's come out of like a decade of working in TV and documentary, not really features or fiction film, but which I think is more structured and hierarchical, I think. But just that sense of, there's a little bit of a looseness around it, especially here, because in our context here in South Africa, it's still very new. So there's a lot of just experimentation, play, and enjoyment of the medium as something novel and new. And that also allows for this kind of a less vertical feeling on set and more horizontal way of working, which I really appreciated. So yeah, so that's pretty much me. I don't have my IG handle here, but if you Google me, Dylan Valley, you should find me on social media. So yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks, Dylan. Sorry if you can hear noise. There seems to be like a whole bunch of helicopters going overhead. So sorry if my audio is a bit helicoptery. Thanks, Dylan. Yeah, I think one of the things that's come out of the labs, that we run a lab workshop for a week, a residential lab every year. Obviously, we haven't done it in the last year, where we bring filmmakers and artists and journalists and photographers from all over Africa together to kind of think about making VR and sort of explore ideas. And Dylan was part of that, as he said. But a lot of the artists that have come to the labs have said exactly that same thing, that they felt a sense of freedom working in a new medium. I mean, scary too, right? That they didn't really know what they were doing, and it kind of felt like they were kind of, and a lot of people say they felt like they were building the bridge as they were walking across it. Like that's been a common kind of feeling, I think. But the playfulness and the freedom and the fact that they didn't feel like they were inheriting a medium that had already been kind of solidified. I think that's been a big thing too, like to feel like you're there kind of at the beginning and that you can kind of build it along with everyone else. I think that's such a for me, that's a really exciting thing about VR still. Okay, so let's turn to one of our other experts. Yasmin and Darren have both been mentors at our lab and shared like so much just so much amazing insights about their work. So Yasmin, take it away.
Hi, my name is Yasmin Elliot, and I'm one of the co-founders at Scatter. Scatter is an immersive creative company based in Brooklyn, and we are pioneering a genre of immersive media that we call volumetric filmmaking. Volumetric filmmaking is the marriage between gaming and film. We leverage the power and flexibility of a game engine with the craft and sensibility of filmmaking, where we feature real people, real stories, and real places volumetrically captured inside of 3D worlds that we construct. This allows us to create immersive room-scale experiences where you can walk through the environment where these stories take place, you can interact with the characters and feel their presence, essentially creating worlds as immersive as our real world. We have a body of award-winning work that has premiered across film festivals such as Clouds, co-directed by my business partner James, which is one of the earliest VR docs to premiere at Sundance in 2014, and this is even in the early days of Oculus before they got acquired by Facebook. And Clouds is a project that explores a creative coding community and interviews a lot of the leading artists, and so you get to experience these artist interviews, but also experience their actual artwork as code in this VR experiences. And then there's 0 Days, which I directed and premiered at Sundance in 2017, and that project explores cyber warfare and specifically the Stuxnet virus, and we won an Emmy for this title in October 2018 for Outstanding News and Documentary Approaches. And then finally Blackout, which we made during Trump's presidency during a very polarized climate in America, and we wanted to explore what does it mean to be American and what is, otherness and identity through the lived-in experiences of New Yorkers around us. And the most important thing about our work is we really focus on elevating stories that we find most important and relevant to today. Core to our ethos at Scatter is that creativity and art propel innovation, and you just can't have one without the other. So our practice of story making and tool building is really intertwined. So in the making of our films and to achieve our creative vision, we build the tools that we need to actually achieve our creative ideas. And so story making, tool building together allow us to push the limits of our creativity. And that's how we build our product DepthKit, and DepthKit is our approach to volumetric filmmaking. DepthKit is a software toolkit for accessible volumetric video capture that uses off-the-shelf hardware like depth sensors and a laptop. The way DepthKit works is it captures the world in depth and in color. It's accessible volumetric capture that allows you to capture real people and real human performance. And that brings me to our latest project, The Changing Same, which is our latest original production. It's a co-production between Scatter and Rada Film Group that's made its world premiere at Sundance this year in January, and then it's going to be making its New York premiere at Tribeca Film Festival in June, just a month away. And we're really excited about that. And The Changing Same is a magical, realist, immersive, room-scale VR experience where you travel through time and space to explore the last 400 years of history of racial injustice in America. The goal of The Changing Same is remembering and understanding this collective history to allow for healing and growth moving forward. It's a respectful, poetic story infused with magical realism and Afrofuturism. You time travel on a nonlinear journey and you witness how history has not changed. It only has evolved. We're calling this journey an American pilgrimage through history. The project confronts the United States' history of lynching and examines how the U.S.'s legacy of racial violence is just cyclical and continues in forms such as mass incarceration and police brutality. The story is based on real events that have been abstracted into speculative fiction. The idea is you need to acknowledge the past to build a new future. And so The Changing Same retells these stories in the context of confronting the past. And also it enables us to not only memorialize this buried history, but to reimagine it. So at the end of your 400-year time travel journey, you find yourself in an Afrofuturist world, in an equitable future for all. What would that future look like?
Stand back and watch for the closing doors.
welcome to my world. You know, here, Mariana, you can experience the past and see the future. Our future. You want to enter, but entry needs to feel my world.
You in? Or you out?
And then owning it.
So I thought it'd be helpful for this panel today to share a little bit of the making of, or the behind the scenes of this project. And one of the pretty spectacular things about making The Changing Same is we did this entire production during COVID, during a pandemic. So the entire team is working remotely across 4 different time zones, and not only the United States, also abroad. And we had to figure out how to do a shoot with real people and real actors in a very COVID compliant way. And so this is the set. This is actually a little bit of the behind the scenes of the stage that we're using. This is where all the actors were captured. Those are depth sensors. This is our software depth kit, and this is what it looks like. You can also see a virtual kind of representation of the camera configuration. So yeah, this is kind of how the shoot was set up in the set. And then on the other side, talking about like world building and the game engine, as I mentioned, our goal with this project is to reclaim those sites of, where racial terror has happened or this buried history has happened in the United States, and how to not only like capture these sites, but also memorialize them and remember them. And so one of the things that's interesting about this project, even though it's become a hybrid speculative fiction, it is based on real events. And one of these true stories is the story of Claude Neal and his lynching in 1934 in Marianna, Florida. It's considered one of the worst spectacle lynchings in the United States. And so our team went to and visited each of the sites of where this lynching took place in Marianna, Florida. And this is here one of the dirt road. You can see the kind of like some of the greenery in the area where this horrific event took place. And we use a technique called photogrammetry to capture a lot of these unmarked sites. And we were actually, essentially what photogrammetry is using a DSLR camera and taking thousands and thousands of photos and using a 3D software where you feed these photos in to create a 3D image from it. And so that's how you're getting from what you just saw on the real video of the location to these kind of stylized captures. There's different ways of treating it, but this is essentially kind of a light touch way of explaining photogrammetry. And so this is how we got the real assets that are going to become part of our real world in The Changing Same. I mean, the virtual world of The Changing Same. And then a little bit about the design process. It's kind of you go through this process called world building, right? So it's a design and discovery process. You have to define what is magical realism in The Changing Same, what is Afrofuturism, how will time travel work? And so this is some of our early concept art of that kind of represents that era, right? The cracker house, the swamps, the cypress trees, and this is what it looks like in Unity in the game engine. So us actually building our real assets using the cracker house 3D model based on our photogrammetry shoot, the oak trees, cypress trees, and so forth. And the same thing with the character design. It's the same process. We have one of our lead characters is this woman named Harriet. She's larger than life. She's from the future space, and she's a force of nature and also a healer. And so she stands at 13 foot tall in our concept art. She has these beautiful costumes. She's a hybrid avatar or cyborg, so so half human and half something else. And so to create this character, this is a little bit of the behind the scenes where we were on set shooting this character, and we were using depth kit for the volumetric capture, so this top part of her body, and then we combined it with motion capture so that we can marry the volumetric capture of her top half with the 3D model clothing on the bottom half. So this is kind of the behind the scenes of that process, and here you see the final result. And yeah, and this is what she looks like in the Changing Same, combining this hybrid workflow. So, you know, on a kind of ending note, what's been super exciting to witness as a small hybrid company that's making films and also building and distributing creation tools is to see this emerging discipline of volumetric filmmaking growing over the last few years. These are just some of the projects from our community of creators that have been showing at some of the most prestigious film festivals, you know, around the world, such as Sundance, South by Southwest, and Tribeca. And many of these projects have been acquired or distributed. And, you know, we're so proud of this growing community. And so I wanted to share a little bit of the work being created out there. And if you go to our website at Scatter, we link to a lot of these projects. There's a whole database, and a lot of them are published. If you'd like to watch them or learn more about them, I encourage you to do so. And I also encourage you to join the community of volumetric filmmakers. It needs the leading, you know, artists and storytellers of the day, and that's what you are. And so I really invite you to join us. And with that, I really am grateful to have been part of this panel, and thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so thank you so much, everyone. It was amazing to hear about all of your work, such amazing work. And I think what I love about it as well is it shows like the richness of all the different approaches to telling different kinds of stories with different kinds of technology tools in the VR space. And it shows, I think, what Darren was talking about earlier, that it's not necessarily about the technology, it's about the tools, but the technology enables you to do a lot of really amazing things in terms of story and connection. And that, I think, is something that we all love about the VR space. So to wrap up, if each one of you could give one piece of advice for someone who wants to get into VR and is about to get into VR for the very first time, what do you wish you'd known, or what do you think that they should take away now? Darren Emmerson.
It's a difficult question. I mean, the thing I love about it, and it's something Dylan was saying earlier, is that it does feel like there is a space to experiment. There is potentially sort of less pressure in terms of those hierarchies he was talking about, which I totally agree with. And so for me, that's the joy of creation. You're able to kind of really, it's pure sort of kind of storytelling in that way. You've got a set of tools that you can explore, and you can try all different sorts of ways of making your story work. So, I mean, I just probably go back to the idea of like, just if you're able to get your hands on a cheap camera and a recording device, some sort of like a Zoom recording device, something that, you know, and to go out there and to experiment really and see what works for you. There's something really sort of kind of great about filming something, stitching it, and then putting it in a headset and feeling how different it feels to when you were out there shooting it, and to kind of understand that relationship between the creation of it and the experience of it is a really important thing to understand as a creator, because, you know, I've done it loads where I'm just staring at a timeline, everything's flat, you know, and I've done that for like days, and I put it in a headset again, and I'm like, oh, like it feels different. And I think that's really, really important. And to, you know, you mentioned it, Ingrid, at the beginning, because you didn't put it in your presentation, but sound is like super important. And almost just kind of starting there and creating a soundscape and an environment that you can kind of layer images on. I think it's yeah. So experiment and have fun, really.
Great. Dylan?
Yes, totally agree with what Darren is saying. And I would also say, you know, just try and watch as much stuff as possible, because sometimes these things can feel very kind of out of reach or like kind of above our heads. But we just need to demystify it. And like the best way is just to try and watch as much 360 and immersive content as possible. Obviously, it's hard to get hold of headsets, especially these days. There aren't as many public gatherings with headsets and things like that. But you could go right now on YouTube, and there's a lot of 360 stuff on there. Start with using your phone, you know, move it around like a magic window, and start with that, you know, and just watch as much as you can, which is the same for anyone who wants to get into film. It's really about watching you know, watch films, you know, and so like just get into it in that way. See how you can get involved. In Kenya, there's great stuff being done. Black Rhino and other people are doing such amazing stuff. So it's definitely happening. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. And Yasmin?
I mean, I agree with everything been said so far. I would say that I think the biggest thing for me is two things. I think I just want to underscore again what both Darren and Dylan were saying, which is there isn't really like a body of practice to really stand on. We're talking just about a few years. So I think the most important thing is there are no rules, and whichever background you're coming from, I think you can definitely introduce something into the field. And I think that's important because I think that's what creates, you know, diversity and just more richness in this work. And then I think the second thing I would say is is the idea that you see it as like having access to like a plethora of different types of tools. So a camera lens is a tool, physics is a tool, an experiential tool, I mean. So it's like thinking of yourself as like, instead of a director, I like to think of myself as a what's the word, like an influencer or a world builder, because you're actually creating all these different experiential tools that are part of the narrative and part of the experience. And so I think like removing this kind of mindset of the director and thinking of yourself as a designer or world builder is kind of the right approach.
I would just kind of add to that, because that there are so many different tools, and one of the key things I think is collaboration. I know collaboration is important in film and all sorts of different arts, but sometimes I think people get hung up on the fact that they feel like they might have to learn how to stitch 360 video. They might have to also learn Unity, Unreal, like all these different kind of like really complicated kind of things. And it's great to understand them and to know about them and to think about how to use them. But there's also other people hopefully out there that can guide you, that have experience in that. And so it's about taking what you really want to do in the medium and finding possibly some people that are already maybe experimenting in that and collaborating with them as well. It's kind of a shortcut really, instead of trying to do it all yourself.
Perfect. I think that's a really great point to end on. And I'll just say that, you know, we're not a huge community across Africa, but there's a lot of really awesome people doing cool stuff. And if you want to get involved, you know, jump in. If you follow the hashtag Immersive Africa, you'll find a lot of organizations and people who are like really willing to help and will put you in touch with people. And like Darren says, you don't need to be able to do all of the bits. If you have an idea, there are people out there who can help you make it. So find us on Immersive Africa. There's also, if you do have a headset, there's a VR chat meetup on Thursdays that you can find through Immersive Africa. I think it's 9 p.m. on Thursday evenings, 9 p.m. South African time. So jump in and you can meet lots of other creators from across Africa. Cool. Okay, I think we're out of time. Thank you so much, everybody. And thanks for inspiring us all, including me. I always get really inspired when I have these conversations. Yeah, go forth and make things.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Bye.
Bye.